You know, there's kind of two sides to Orthodoxy, two sides to Ukraine, East and West. In the East, midnight was the big thing for the celebration of Pascha, because no one knows the time that Christ is risen from the dead. And because of that, there's no fasting on Pascha, because of the fact that the fast begins at midnight, and if you're going to church at midnight, you can eat right up to the point where you get to church. Fast doesn't begin till midnight. So it's a double win, I suppose, if we look at it from that perspective. And I've heard many of my brother priests say the same. In Western Ukraine, it was different, because they followed this gospel, actually, that it was early in the morning, right before sunrise, that the Myrrh bearers go to the tomb to finish anointing the body. So from where I grew up, we always had 6 in the morning. And what would happen is that as we were going around the church, and as soon as we hit the front doors, the very first glimpse of the sun, and it didn't matter when, it always seemed like that worked. Always had that first glimpse of the sun, we were seeing that Christ was risen, and the goosebumps would come through. So it's kind of one of those that depends what you're used to, really. For me, I can never get used to midnight. It's just not the same. You know, I'm not totally awake, especially after driving all day and etc. Where in the morning I was always, you got your sleep, you got your rest, you were ready to shake, rattle, and roll. But that's not totally true, because I think most of my priesthood I've had at least 2 parishes. For the past 15 years, 3 parishes, but usually I only had 2. So it would always work with midnight and 6 in the morning, but that's what I was about. I don't know why I brought that up, just I guess the gospel kind of hit me in the head with it. It was like, depends which way you look at life and which way you look at it. But I think the one thing that has to be said about this gospel, think about the fact that the guys are all cowering and hiding. You know, we hear that during the feast of St. Thomas, the first Sunday, that they're all hiding, and we went to Agape Vespers on Pascha, because of fear of the Jews. They were afraid to be counted. That's why the other one at the foot of the cross was John. And the reason he was there, more than likely, not only because of his faith, naturally, but because he was taking care of the Holy Mother of God. And it's from there that we hear in John's Gospel those beautiful words, because he was there. Woman, behold your son, and to him behold your mother. But they were afraid. You know, and even Thomas, who leaves the fold, we don't know why. Perhaps to go get supplies, perhaps he wasn't very well known, so he was the one designated to get some food. But he wasn't with the community at the time, and so he had his doubts. And I think it's very true, my dear friends, is that whenever we leave the protection of the church, and I honestly mean protection, because when you think about it, our churches are always built on the basis of Noah's Ark. Why do we have the banners? They're supposed to be the sails, guiding us. Why do we have the icon screen? Again, you know, the pictures of the saints to remind us that one day, God willing, all of our faces will be up there. There is protection in the church. And so leaving that, Thomas has his doubts and his faith is shaken. But the women, that early morn, first of all, to travel in the early morning unaccompanied by men was not the best idea in the world. Roads were not safe. You did not know what could happen to people, much like today if you go to Philadelphia or any of the big cities where all the shootings are going on. And I love Philadelphia. I digress, as Sophia and the Golden Girls would say. Their courage was one that stood up against any of the guys, but also we have to remember that they were also at the foot of the cross. They did not run when the guys did. They stayed. And so early in the morning they get up, they buy the spices to finish the burial rite of a Jewish male, and they're the first ones that the announcement of the resurrection is given. Think about that. Although tradition tells us that Jesus would have went to see Mom before her, only because of the fact that a son and a mother's bond is always very strong. And naturally he would have went because we don't see her anywhere at this point, right? More than likely he would have went to her and said, Mom, everything's okay, I'm risen, everything's going to be great, don't worry about me, everything's fine. But these women and their courage is something that we sing about every year. The icon that you'll see there for veneration, in which we remember Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus and the three women as well, only because of the fact of their courage that day. And I often think about, especially on this feast day, what about our courage? How often it's much easier to give in to society, to give in to the people around us, to take the time to, imbibe a little too much or to eat a little too much, because everybody's doing it, Very dangerous with the DUI laws in effect today. It's something that I've always kind of preached against because I had a young cousin. It was Easter time, actually. It was Easter time. She and I sat down and we scoped out her senior year of high school and classes she was going to sign up for and everything else. Not knowing within a week she'd get hit with other kids going down the shore from a drunk driver who came across the median on the Atlantic City expressway and killed the whole cargo of kids, young people that were going to graduate the next year. But we ourselves do not take the time to allow our faith, our commitment to Christ, to be the guiding light in our lives. How often do we go to a restaurant and we fail to even say grace before a meal because we're afraid that people are going to see? And trust me, I've had people ridicule me in the restaurant because of it. It's okay. The steak still tasted just as good. The service was just as good. And the dessert was to die for, although I'm not a big dessert eater, but depending where you go. And I think that's the biggest problem we face today, my dear friends, is our lack of courage, our lack of faith. We call ourselves Christians, and for the most part, even for us as priests, we wear these big pectoral crosses and, we do all these things, but in our hearts is that cross emblazoned there. On our minds is that cross emblazoned. In our deeds is the cross emblazoned. So, my dear friends, as we venerate this icon of the holy myrrh bearers, let us look at it as a sign of courage for us as well, welling up within us, so that we could go into the world, and you don't have to stand on a soapbox on the corner of Center City, whatever town you're from here, and proclaim the gospel of truth. No, you don't have to do that. But you could do it by your words. You could do it by your actions. You can do it by giving away one of your smiles. You can do it by encouraging others, especially our youth, to live a Christ-like life. And the only way they will see that is if they see it in us. Let us all say